Welcome back, everyone. In session 2 of CUTS and CIRC's webinar on competition policy for an inclusive and resilient economy, we would have a paper presentations followed by a panel discussion and in the end, a brief sum up by the chair. Due to some urgent health issues, Mr. Brusink would not be available to chair the session. Instead, we have Dr. Geeta Gauri with us today. Dr. Gauri has 15 years of experience working as a regulatory economist member at the Competition Commission of India and prior to that as Director, Tariffs at Andhra Pradesh Electricity Regulatory Commission. She also served as General Manager at Jawaharlal Nehru Institute for Development Banking. Welcome, Dr. Gauri. Before starting with the session, I would like to make an important house announcement. It is encouraged for the audience to enter their questions for the respective speakers in the Q&A tab or the chat box below to make the session more interactive. The session is being recorded for everyone's convenience. Over to you, Dr. Gauri.
It gives me great pleasure to chair the session. But then, since I was supposed to be a discussant, I also had the advantage of reading all the three papers. I have exactly 5 minutes of time to introduce all of you. And since I went through the papers, and it's a pity that we're missing Amir's paper also, very obviously there have been very interesting subjects that have been chosen. And what I found that was really worthwhile examining was the fact that, in this panel discussion that we are taking place, which is supposed to be on a resilient economy that is occurring, what I found which was most interesting is the fact that competition is being revived again. I think that was the important aspect of the whole discussion that we were going to have. And Amir's paper, which we're going to miss, was looking at the aspect of how you can bring in competition in the telecommunications sector in Bosnia. Then, of course, there was a paper by Sardar, which was again very interesting, where he brings in a more theoretical approach. Both Amir and Sardar had looked at it in terms of an oligopoly model. And Sardar, it was a very interesting paper where you were looking at a single monopoly and having two monopolies in a vertical agreement, where you could lead to a situation of creating rigidity in demand, which is definitely anti-consumer welfare. Now, these two papers were more in terms of economics. And then we had Vijay, who was coming in from the perspective of a consultant and gave a very different and definitely a very positive approach as to perhaps how he could help in young people, or not even young, should I say, small MSME or Kirana stores, whoever wants to get onto the website and what would be required to deal with it. Now, having stated these points that are required, I think it is important for all of us to understand that new issues are coming into competition. And when we're talking about a resilient economy, and I presume Vijay is also going to look at it, and Derek as a discussant and Valerie as a discussant. Sardar, your point I thought was very fascinating. My only objection to all the papers is that we're giving you very little time. It's a little unfair. Everything that has been thought out and intellectually put in was read and compressed, and you have got, I think, 15 minutes for each paper. It is unfair because I took a whole day to read each paper. Well, then that maybe you'll have to cut it to 15 minutes. Let us start off. Shall we start off now first with Sardar? Would you take over and give your presentation? And since there are only two papers now, you have more time.
Amir has joined, ma'am.
Amir has joined? Oh, very nice.
So the title is Supply Chain Antitrust, and that, by the way, I'm connecting from Turkey, so it's about 3 p.m. here. Good afternoon. It's very nice to be invited here, and I'm honored to be among the select people here. The supply chain antitrust and being too big in the context of AT&T's 1984 breakup. I'm thanking friends in the United States, where I was based before I came to Turkey. So among them is the first and foremost Mr. Baseman, who was a co-worker, a colleague, and before that he was at the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, and he was the one who actually introduced me these ideas in this paper in the past. Of course, any errors are my sole responsibility. So with that disclaimer, I'd like to introduce the key terms. I'm coming up with maybe a weird notation, weird expression, which is supply chain antitrust. It means vertical or backward and forward relationship. So it was introduced by Corno's example in the 19th century. There's a copper supplier and a zinc supplier. Together they produce brass. They sell their supplies to a brass producer who produces brass. There's a mirror analysis of firms that are in a chain, in a direct chain, which is the case where the copper supplier directly sells to the zinc supplier, and the zinc supplier produces brass, combines copper with its zinc and produces brass. The interesting thing that arises out of this combination is, or relation is, if the copper supplier and the zinc supplier each maximizes its own profit, then their total price exceeds the integrated monopoly price. And the quantity is, of course, less than the integrated monopoly quantity. So there is the joke, what is worse than a monopoly? It's two monopolies, okay? So it's two monopolies in a chain is worse than one monopoly and no chain because of this pricing externality. Why bring this up now? What is the relevance? In the US, a concern of the Democratic administration has been in antitrust, in competition area, being too big, okay? That wasn't so much an issue in the past Republican administration. That's being called the movement antitrust, and movement is in political movement or social movement in quotes. And Lima Khan has been appointed as the FTC chair recently, who is sort of in the vicinity of this movement antitrust policy. Of course, as a second issue, there's the supply chain problems exacerbated by the pandemic. We are experiencing it now. Thirdly, there's the issue of vertical webs. As in the case of Facebook plus Instagram plus WhatsApp, they're all combined in a metaverse. And you can say these are complementary inputs, okay? I'm waving my hands a little, but let's say they are complementary in the first and foremost, they are complementary. On the other hand, there's been, very recently, there's been a split up of large corporations like the GE, Johnson & Johnson, Toshiba. Now, I'm not an expert in these splitting of corporations, but those are typically along complementary lines as far as I can see. So I'm holding that apart. So it's mainly the first 3 points, 1, 2, 3. Okay, market share, supply chain, and vertical webs. That brought me to lessons from history, or my straw man in this paper. And by the way, I'm not a telecoms expert. So, I mean, basically I was building a straw man or a snowman, if you like, okay, which can melt, you know. So AT&T's breakup in '84, AT&T was broken up between long distance and local by a consent decree with the Department of Justice. And that's thoroughly analyzed in this paper I'm quoting, The Effects of Breakup of AT&T on Telephone Penetration in the United States by Jerry Hausman, Timothy Tardif, and Alexander Belifante, published in the AER in May 1993. Excellent analysis. All three excellent econometricians, economists. And of course, before splitting up a monopoly, okay, it's a vertically integrated monopoly. Long distance is vertically integrated. It's co-owned with the local service. So there are no price externalities. And the successive monopolies problem doesn't arise. It's one monopoly. So it's the best of a worse situation. So why did they split it up and make it worse, right? So Hausman, etc., their answer is, well, AT&T was subsidizing local service through excessive pricing of the long distance service, okay? And that was to further technology adoption at the local level. You subsidize the local service, make it cheaper, and so more people will get telephones. They'll use telephones more often. But of course, this cross-subsidization is sort of it's a sin. It's a market imperfection. It disrupts the efficiency of markets. Okay, so I mean that's Hausman, etc.'s explanation. Okay, so they say maybe it's because of this they split up AT&T, but then they come back and say that didn't require a cut up of the AT&T. You could have solved this through a lump sum surcharge on the local service, okay, and then there's no more subsidization. But of course, as we all know, instead of this ex ante regulation, they preferred the ex post regulation, structural breakup. So their explanation is that local regulators may have been worried that a surcharge, the ex ante solution, could reduce adoption of telephone technology. You're raising sort of prices or the user charges at the local level. And then they discuss this, okay, which I'm not going to go into this. Now I have about 5 minutes, I guess. So my conclusions are, out of that straw man or the snowman, I'm taking out, the product is perhaps the antitrust enforcers, the Department of Justice, instinctively, not theoretically, but instinctively knew that vertically separate firms are less likely to invest in demand rigidity, which reduces consumer welfare. Why? Because there is what is called a free riding problem. When two monopolies interact in a vertical relationship, if one of them invests in demand rigidity, the other monopoly, the sister monopoly, will want to free ride on this investment, okay? So the first monopolist would be less interested in making that investment. And henceforth, the it will be less likely to invest in demand rigidity because of this free riding problem. So maybe that was the reason that they thought of splitting up the AT&T, or maybe it was one reason why they thought, let's break up AT&T, okay, instead of looking for regulatory, ex-ante regulatory solutions. So that's the conclusion. That's the sort of the punchline of the paper. And the future road is, I can see, as far as I can see, there's an issue of balancing double marginalization versus free riding in supply chain kind of relationships, and how that would affect consumer welfare or total welfare, and therefore the tax intake of the government, total welfare through and taxes. Probably it may have to be done on a case-by-case basis. There's no overarching result. And obviously, further analysis is required. And above all, hopefully in the future, we'll be celebrating the recognition of December 5th as the World Competition Day. And thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Serdar. We'll take it up later and on a very interesting paper. And you read it, it's really very interesting. Amin, can I now, are you ready now?
Yes, I'm ready. In the start of that presentation, actually my paper that I will present is focused on the impact of the oligopolistic structure in the field of telecommunications, and on users on the one hand and potential competitors on the other. So we will focus on the following issues. First one, is in oligopoly too important to understand trade relations? Second, what are strategic policies of the national economy when it comes to oligopoly? Third, are oligopoly experiences important for the global economy or the regional economy? And finally, how the national competition authorities react to developments in oligopolitics markets. If we know what about relate that work, it's known that on oligopoly is understood as a few supply side firms, and where customers don't have a wide range of supply side firms. And appreciating this axiom or rule, however, the elasticity of demand will not be expressed due to the limited number of firms. Second, but is present due to different price for the same or very similar products. So the specificity of telecommunications in B&H and everywhere is that we have actually a large barrier to entry into this market. For example, technical, financial, regulatory, etc. Therefore, in my country, B&H, we have 3 operators with significant market power, and 4, of course, which has a certain degree of significant market power in the field of audio-visual content. In this regard, the communications regulatory body sets and establish like ex-ante rules, while the Competition Council, our institution, implements ex-post regulations. In this sense, it's necessary to establish certain measurement of the market structure in order to determine the formal market power and accordingly whether individual telecom operators disrupt the market in the terms of price. So this actually means whether they have certain tacit prices or market extra profits at the expense of end users or actually thus preventing other operators from entering the market. You can see that next slide show that standard concentration measurements include the called Harfingal-Hirschman index and concentration rates for the strongest companies in the industry. The given measurement determined the following. In next tables, you can see the Serie 4 indicators include all telecom companies and is 100. For the leading telecom companies, for example, CR3, varies from 84 to 85. If you look at the number of users, this indicator will not be identical to all segment market since in the field of audiovisual content, it has the largest market share. While the numbers of users of other services, for example, mobile and fixed telephony for alternate operators are convincingly low. So due to the large difference in the given sizes, revenues were considered as a better indicator or market share. So the HHI index is general index of market concentration assessment. Pursuant to the guidelines of the European Commission for the assessment of horizontal mergers under the Council regulation on the control of concentration between entities. So HHI then less 200 is not concentrated. HHI index if equal or more or less 100 to 2000 and difference high HHI index is lower than 2050, it's actually moderately concentrated. And HHI then more than 2000 and HHI is lower than 250. That means highly concentrated market. So the following table shows the value of the HHI index for the Bosnian telecom operator market based on revenues of telecom operators. So we can see and conclude that HHI has had a downward trend as a result of slight increase in competition in the market. However, it's still a high concentrated market. No major oscillation are noticeable in the given market segment, and the three leading telecom operators are still leading, except for the audiovisual content market. And finally, we conclusion next issues. In the telecommunications market in Bosnia and Herzegovina, are several telecom companies that offer similar services that are different in price. According to the index, we see a high degree of concentration in this market. So, however, the agreed oligopoly is not present because firms have different price levels of services and different offers. So that can be concluded, even though there are more than two firms in the market, is the situation of incomprehensible oligopoly where consumers will switch from on one service provider to another due to different prices levels. One mentioned similar market structure in neighborhood countries. I mean Croatia, Serbia, or Montenegro. The Hannon-Kay index in additional market sensitive analysis, they would use net profit or EBIT or average number of employees, number of business units EPC is a very, very interesting, a very significant measurement for next future researching, for example. I hope I haven't taken too much time, and I apologize once again for not being able to stay in the next discussion.
Thank you, Amir. And since you have to leave soon, I'll just give my comment, if you don't mind. You know, your experience is very similar to the studies we did in India before we got opened up for the telecommunication. It has come down to only 3 players. You know, the number that was decided as being useful or viable is only that of 3 players. And what you brought out in your paper, but you didn't bring it out in your conclusions so much, is the need for having different type of packages that can be offered. And that I thought was very interesting. And I did enjoy reading your paper, because you're part of the competition authority, of which I'm also one of them. Now, can I request the next paper to be presented also? This is by Vijaya Ishwara, who is a CEO, and he's coming up with very interesting sessions. If you could stay on, he will show you some ideas that he has of his consultancy that he does. Vijaya? Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? All right. Good morning. Hi, everyone. I want to start by thanking Pradeep, Uday, and the entire CUTS team for organizing this event and giving me an opportunity to share some views. And also great to share this moment with other esteemed panelists and all of you. Thank you. Today we are celebrating World Competition Day, and our conference is about competition policy for an inclusive and resilient economy. And I'm sharing my views about e-commerce as a vehicle for inclusive global economy. I am Vijay Ishwara, founder of an advisory and consulting practice in maritime shipping global trade sector. Currently, I am involved in developing e-commerce portal for luxury sector and also screen-based trading solutions for maritime shipping to reduce complexities within that industry, and also for the export-import sectors. Today's presentation is purely from my personal experiences and views. The presentation has 4 sections in Q&A format. It will be easier for us to grapple with all the information that's out there. The first section will deal with research questions. Let's look at some research questions, and then we will look at some of the problems that we identified. And then we will look at some of the research findings, and then we will be talking about way forward, and we'll close with some final thoughts. I have a total of about 15 points, so you will, through all these four sections. So research questions, let's look at the first one. So the question is, e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce, what's the difference? Broadly, e-commerce refers to the ability of interested parties interacting with each other for discharging certain commercial activities in a timely, efficient, and transparent manner. Main goal for cross-border e-commerce is really about export-import operations for the purpose of securing valuable foreign exchange reserves. Main goal for domestic e-commerce is about home currency operations to streamline domestic wholesale and retail trade across the country. Now, second question, how did e-commerce come to exist? So it is the direct result of confluence of advancements in computer sciences, business requirements for reaching out to new customers, and good old entrepreneurial ingenuity. So early days of computing revolution, personal computing revolution was all about doing routine small tasks routinely and quickly and efficiently. Then we experienced productivity tools which resulted in vast amounts of data. And later, with advancements in internet technologies and cloud computing, the case for e-commerce is quite clear. It has become quite clear. So what are the current trends? From my observation, the advantages of having e-commerce capabilities for a business continue to grow. So there is m-commerce, which is mobile commerce, and then v-commerce, which is virtual commerce. And then you have tools such as, or technologies, whatever you call it, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, they're all making waves in supporting this, activity. Given that, so what does inclusivity mean in e-commerce? So the basic premise with e-commerce tools is anyone can set up a website cheaply and quickly to sell their products. Given that, how should we regulate? This is the million-dollar question. This industry is the core of modern knowledge work. Brilliant ideas, new concepts, innovative process flows, and exciting use case scenarios are all part of the activities. So regulators must consider the following, the differences between three main groups. One is innovators or creators. Second is distributors. Third is end users, like all of us. So sweet spot for regulating this industry could be somewhere between operating like a golf cart or a bullet train. So that's the range we're looking at. Now let's look at the second section. Let's identify some problems. Problems identified. E-commerce sounds simple. Ujjwal, yeah, can you go to the second one? Yes, thank you. E-commerce sounds simple, so what's the problem? In reality, most websites do not receive enough visitors to justify startup costs. Without a constant stream of visitors, the opportunity for selling anything is quite remote. Internet traffic is an expensive commodity offered by tech giants for the benefit of the highest bidder. So in a sense, the true cost of doing business is unknowable. So when combined with the steep learning curve for implementing, say, latest tools, it becomes quite a humongous hurdle for progress. And as a result, inclusivity suffers. Now let's look at the second question. Well, e-commerce is e-commerce. Why should we care about it? Let me explain. All e-commerce is not created equal. Cross-border trade depends on free trade agreements. So if your country does not have one of those great FTAs or hot trending products, your businesses are at a disadvantage. Current cross-border e-commerce format appears to be, to a large extent, in a B2C format, that is business to consumer or direct to consumer, where business sends out small packages through FedEx, UPS, DHL, what have you. It's not predominantly business to business. So cross-border business to business e-commerce offers each country its own self-reliance and nation-building tools. Given that, what should we regulate? Before I answer that, no one should attempt to regulate human thought and knowledge work, especially when it comes to for the benefit of the society. So regulators should consider and monitor trends in accumulation of market power, industry or sector consolidations, distribution bottlenecks, and related costs, and last but not the least, capital availability to innovators. There is sufficient awareness and global discussion related to market power accumulated by a few key players, and I'm sure everybody is aware of that. And we are all seeing live examples in day-to-day news articles. So now moving on to next section, research findings. Who are the players? There are several players in e-commerce space. Most global names are Facebook, Metaverse, or Meta platforms, where virtual real estate is going for millions of dollars, as we all know. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, IBM, eBay. These are all the familiar names. Now, what exactly do they do? Tech companies run quite complex operations. As non-technical end users, we should note that there are broadly front-end, back-end, middleware, and internet technologies. Beyond that, there is an entire universe that coexists to make our modern lives possible. So here is an interesting question, or something to ponder. Why a major global e-commerce platform from another country is not the answer for fixing cross-border flows? I will explain. The survival of a global platform from another country is not influenced by your domestic businesses. I give you 4 points here. If your businesses do not sell quality products in appealing packages on favorable financial terms, they are not promoted. If your businesses are cash-starved and cannot innovate fast enough to meet global client demand and expectations, then they are left behind. If your businesses lack sufficient knowledge to deploy greatest marketing tools, then your businesses are irrelevant. If your country has marginal or non-existing logistics operations, then no amount of technology can change the outcomes. So given all that, how does inclusivity work here? I will give you a different perspective. Global GDP is $88 trillion right now, of which US GDP is $20 trillion, of which top 5 US companies have a market value of about $8 trillion, which is 40% of US GDP and 9.5% of global GDP. Now take your own country and apply similar logic, and you will get some clarity on levels of inclusivity in that, in that each space. So when you have top 5 companies have such a massive influence, they become more powerful than most national sovereign governments. Humans currently live on, we all live on our mobile phones and online banking apps. If someone gets logged out of their phone or bank account or any of the portals that they interact with on a daily basis, for any reason whatsoever, they simply cease to exist in our modern world. This is the danger to inclusivity. Moving on to the next section, let's look a way forward. How do we strengthen domestic e-commerce? Start with identifying gaps in physical, financial, and internet structures. So we should look at high-speed 5G capable networks, road, rail, water transport networks, warehousing, and other distribution channels. Coming to cross-border, how do we strengthen cross-border e-commerce for more inclusivity? Emerging economies should expand both export and import bases to several sectors. Excessive focus and investments into 1 or 2 core sectors can be detrimental to national survival in periods of adverse market conditions. So invest more knowledge resources, deploy sufficient capital to assist micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Because today's micro, small, medium-sized enterprises are tomorrow's foreign exchange reserve earners. Export readiness and streamlined import processes are critical to strengthening cross-border trade. Well-defined permitting and licensing procedures, digitalizing export-import operations can be very useful in implementing cross-border e-commerce systems with all your trading partners. Fantastic. So what else can we do? When a problem exists, most governments go to large, well-known companies because they appear to offer easy solutions. Instead of investing in domestic talent, they prefer to do foreign tie-ups. The reason for doing this may be different for each situation. I'm not here to comment on that. But the result is governments handing over part of their portfolio to global operators, which may later become a detrimental factor in regulating. This is something to be given due consideration. Before we go, my final thoughts. For a historic perspective, please take a look at the book of Eric Klein titled 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. This work is about the last Bronze Age and its collapse. There was quite a bit of cross-border trade happening in copper and tin when it collapsed. There was a mass exodus, which changed several national trajectories. We hope the internet age stays robust for a while. Nations should not be ill-prepared by outsourcing their inclusivity problems to third parties with undue influence. E-commerce can offer useful tools for expanding inclusivity both nationally and globally. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vijay. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you again very much to Cuts. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of speaking in Jaipur. This year, it all has to be virtual, but it's a great pleasure to be invited to take part again. So thank you to Cuts and all the participants. And this is a very important topic, and I really welcome all of the papers. And I think all of them make a really interesting and valuable contribution to the way we have to think about this thing. So going in order, I really appreciate it and enjoyed Dr. Dalkir's attempt to obtain a little bit of a deeper understanding into a long-standing puzzle. Why did they do this? And I think as an ex post, I tried to work through the math, and it all made very good sense to me. And I think as an ex post explanation, it would certainly explain why that decision was taken, if it was taken by an all-wise and all-benevolent a competition authority at the time. I confess, and what I'm about to confess is driven by over a decade inside authorities, I confess I suspect that the real reason was probably less sophisticated than what Dr. Dalkir proposes. I mean, I had a quick look, I had a little bit of a look back in the dates that these were done, and I noticed that the DOJ first filed in 1974 and the consent decree was passed in 1982. And in 1974, it was just much less settled that vertical integration is mostly benign in the way that Dr. Dalkir proposes, and I certainly absolutely accept and agree with. I noted that Aaron Director and others in Chicago had already opened the debate, but it was only in 78 that Bork and 79 that Posner wrote their texts that propelled these ideas into the mainstream. So I'm being very cynical, and probably makes me a much less nice person than Dr. Dalkir in terms of my view of human nature. I suspect the decision was probably much more, may have rested more on the unexamined received wisdom at the time, which has now been displaced. And I do know, I think that's consistent with how governments sometimes, unfortunately, can operate. And just looking at the other areas of the public choice literature, I do note, I think we all know that individuals in government can sometimes make great careers for themselves in addition to or instead of making great decisions for their countries. But I think in a benign world, I thought it was a fascinating exercise, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. And in a benign world with better people than me, better angels than I have, I think it would be a very, very good reason to make that decision. That's the DOJ made at the time. And I noticed that the president and Mr. Karlich, I think, is leftist, and again, I also welcome this paper and its very careful analysis. I noticed that there was a very strong emphasis on concentration and the sheer market structure in line with a quite orthodox structure, conduct, performance paradigm. And just out of curiosity, not finding fault with the paper, I did, if Mr. Karlich was still, I'd be really curious to know if the council sort of thinks about the distinction between services-based and facilities-based competition in telco, and what the council's views on that. Again, just to ask the question, not being prescriptive about the answer. I personally think mandated access tools, if we have an environment where there are bottleneck blocks of certain aspects of the infrastructure rather than the infrastructure as a whole, say, the pipes and wires in relation to landlines rather than the wires themselves, that kind of thing. If there is a reasonable solution where unblocking that block gives rise to facilities-based competition, then I'm not persuaded that the barriers to entry and the likely to entryhood are as high as Mr. President suggests. I think if we can identify, we know that laying new lines, the expensive thing is not the wire, it's digging up the road and sealing it up again. So if we can give access to the pipes and wires, it's actually quite cheap to blow a new set of wires in and put in electronic kit at either end. So I'm more optimistic, about facilities-based competition in circumstances of identifying those blocks. But I certainly agree with the President noting the cave reference that competition is a great regulator, and that's my motivation for making that observation. But apart from that, I enjoyed it very much, so thank you. And Mr. Iswara, thank you again for your paper. I'm reading the paper, I was reminded of a couple of quotes by a couple of very famous economists. First, the quote by the Professor Bob Solow, the Nobel Prize winner, his infamous remark in 1987 that the quote, "computer age is everywhere except in the productivity statistics." He said this in 1987, but then later he resiled from that and said, aha, now we can see the productivity in the computer statistics. So it's a nice reminder of just how far-reaching the IT revolution has been and continues to be, and in such a wide variety of ways that couldn't have been contemplated earlier and didn't become manifest until after it started. And I'm also reminded that technology growth is even wider than just IT and extends to mobile phones and other technological but non-necessarily IT things, like the very important and low-cost democratizing effects of access to mobile phones by fishermen in Africa who can market their catch while they're still out at sea in ways that I just wouldn't have conceived of when I was young, but is now possible for $50 and for any fisher boats. And I vehemently agree with the focus, the policy prescription of focusing on innovation-killing activities as a target for regulators as enforcement. And this is my second comment by an economics Nobelist, Bob Lucas, who once said that once you start thinking about growth, it's hard to think about anything else. That innovation and that context of the process of creative destruction and leapfrogging growth. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got the piece of paper in front of the camera, haven't I? I apologize for that. I didn't even notice. I'm very sorry. It's very rude of me. Just that the recognition of innovation as that ultimate driver of long-term growth, much above and beyond factor accumulation. And that any process that harms that really harms societies. And so a policy maker or enforcer who actually does prevent, say, killer acquisitions or conduct that harms innovation is really doing a good thing for their society. I think I've probably spoken more than enough. So thank you to all of you for the papers, and I really enjoyed them.
Thank you, Derek. It was. You have read the papers very well. And I'm glad I'm not a discussant because we would have overlapped a little too much. Now, Valerie, are you fine now? Would you be able to come on?
Thank you very much, Derek, for stepping in so swiftly. But let me start just by expressing my deep gratitude to CUTS and CIRC for the invitation to today's thought-stimulating event in honor of World Competition Day. It's really my great pleasure and honor to participate as a discussant and to represent, in fact, the EBRD at today's event in my role as a principal economist for competition at the EBRD. I wanted to also thank the esteemed speakers for presenting the interesting papers, which I think really raise important issues in the telecommunications, e-commerce, but also broader technology sectors and in the context of digitalizing economies. Before diving into my discussing remarks on the individual papers, I wanted to provide a little bit of context in relation to the latest developments at the EBRD in the digital space, because it's really from that perspective that I would like to offer my remarks. And as many of you will know, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is a regional development bank that was created in 1991 to help foster the transition to open market-oriented economies and promote private and entrepreneurial initiative. And the EBRD does so through three main tools: through investments, policy dialogue, and business advisory. And as part of our policy dialogue, for example, my team and I have been supporting various competition authorities in our countries of operations with capacity building, technical cooperation projects. But of course, the EBRD has also long recognized the crucial role of digital infrastructure and technologies enabling transition along its 6 transition qualities. And 2, importantly, of these transition qualities are resilient and inclusive, which are, of course, the topic of today's event. So, of course, you will all agree with me that the digital transition in some ways touches upon every aspect of life, and that there are important opportunities for global economies in this. And so in recognizing this, the EBRD has in fact only last month approved its first approach to the digital transition. And in this approach, digitalization is really recognized as an accelerator with enormous catalytic potential across the transition to an open market economy. And so over the coming years, the EBRD really plans to intensify its efforts to support this with investments, advisory services, and policy dialogue. And it's in this context that I would like to really congratulate once again all of the authors for really raising relevant issues to this objective. So with respect to the individual papers, let me start off by, because this is the order in which I read them in line with the original agenda. I started with the paper by Dr. Karlic, which of course focused on the telecommunications sector. And here, of course, this is in the context of the broader digital transition, of course, a sector that really forms the crucial foundation upon which the digital transition relies more fundamentally. And because without connectivity, it's simply impossible for individuals to participate in the digitalizing economy in an inclusive way and to really build a resilient digital economy. And yeah, in this context, I thought it was really important that Dr. Karlic focused on the analysis of the market structure in the telecommunications sector in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also really wanted to answer important questions with respect to the outcomes for consumers in the market. I wanted to offer 3 main comments that I'm hoping to, given that he's unfortunately had to leave, perhaps discuss with him in a separate follow-on discussion. My first point relates to the policy implications that he's drawing from his important work. I'm bringing this up also in the context of analysis that we as the EBRD have undertaken on the telecommunications sector in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which shows that there is the potential to increase the certainty and clarity of the legal and regulatory framework in the country. And so I would be interested in understanding what implications he's specifically drawing from his work for his policy side of the work. Secondly, I wanted to suggest to him or ask him to what extent he has also considered undertaking analysis regionally, given that we know that from our work, the 3 operators that he mentioned hold significant market power in the market, are really regionally distributed. And so I believe it would be very interesting to also conduct an analysis of concentration at a regional level rather than at a national level, and see what that analysis shows. And thirdly, he does mention in his paper that he has not focused on a comparison of outcomes with other countries, notably in the region. But since he draws the implication that from a consumer perspective, there really does seem to be a choice of prices and technical specifications available, it would also be insightful perhaps to compare the level of the prices from an absolute perspective to that of comparator countries, to see if we really feel that the market is delivering. Moving on now to the second paper by Serdar. This, of course, also focused on the telecommunications sector, but I believe, so I read it with this sort of eye on wider implications that were being generated. And of course, importantly, what the paper was discussing was this issue of being too big, and really drew some comparisons to some of the policy discussions that are going on today. And this is really an issue that the EBRD is also looking at more closely in the context of its approach to the digital transition. Because whilst we realize that there are significant opportunities, there are also risks. And let me quote some OECD research here, which shows that the more digitalized the sector, the more likely it is to become concentrated. And I believe it was really valuable for Serdar to take a look back historically and think about how this issue was approached in the past and whether there are lessons that we can learn, given that this is now and continues to be an important element to consider for policymakers. Given the concerns that policymakers are directing, especially at the size of tech giants globally. So I would like to revisit this paper once more and perhaps also look forward to follow discussions to see what we can learn from this. But also something that came out in the paper and said that you didn't necessarily bring up in detail now but you also really draw the implication that it's important not just to look at price as a relevant dimension along which competition can take place, but that there is also the issue of quality and customer care that we need to look at. And this continues to be a challenge in the sphere of competition in terms of how we can integrate those concepts to analyze to what extent competition is delivering in that respect. The third paper by Vijay, thank you very much for this. This is, of course, focused on the role of the e-commerce sector. And this, again, is a very interesting sector that we're also thinking about at the EBRD, especially because of its potential that we feel e-commerce can bring to the private sector in our countries of operations, especially amongst small and medium enterprises. And of course, these opportunities, Vijay, you also highlighted extensively in your presentation, which we welcome. However, our own analysis also shows that only about 19% of consumers in the EBRD region, in fact, have made online purchases in the past year, in comparison to 65% in developed comparator countries. And this really shows that there is still significant room, but also hints at the various obstacles that companies are facing and consumers are facing as well, in order to really benefit and make full use of the potential and the innovation that's taking place in the sector. So what the EBRD plans to do is to, again, use its tools on the policy, advisory and investment side to really help develop a supporting environment and help companies realize their potential. And so in the context of this paper was very valuable to also provide additional ideas to us on some of the constraints that we may want to look at and that we may want to tackle through our work going forward. So I would once again like to thank Vijay for this very interesting paper, which I also enjoyed reading very much. Thank you very much. That concludes my remarks for today.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm so glad you were able to get back and join us. You did make very valuable contributions, and I have been given 5 minutes or a little longer, since I was to have been a discussant and not the chairman of the session. And for that sake, I had the advantage of reading all the papers carefully. Let me take up the papers one by one and make my comments. And what is very interesting is the first two papers really concentrate on the aspect of oligopoly. You know, whether you're taking the Kuhner model of oligopoly or you're going to take any other version of it in terms of oligopoly, which means we have to come to accept some things that in the case of virtual or neural markets, there is definitely a tendency for only a few firms to operate. And it is on these firms that the operation takes place. It's only the question, as Vijay says, do you look at the back end or the middle end or the last end that occurs? So when you look at the paper by Amir, which is again very interesting, and the suggestion that he comes to is he's trying to look at if consumers gain or do not gain. And he suggests this the question of collective harmony. Now, you see, having been a regulator for a large portion of my life, you know, we regulators love to intervene. I do not know if it's such a good thing. Sometimes it is better to let the market find its own solutions and work out and have discussions the way that we are having now, thanks to Pradeep and Cuts, that solutions come through more openly from the market than the regulator intervening. And the question I posed myself, and I'm now writing on it, is, did I get it right? Did we just intervene because we thought we were semi-gods or demigods or whatever? And that's a very, very worrying point that comes up. And all of you, all the papers and the comments that have come from the discussions have made the point that perhaps what is necessary is for the regulator to know when to intervene and how to intervene. And therefore, in this section, the suggestion that Amir made was of collective or cooperative behavior is one suggestion that can be thought of. And in the case of Dalkir, in your Sardar, in your paper, I like the concept of double marginalization a lot. You know, this entire vertical system and double marginalization, although you brought in the aspect of two monopolies versus one monopoly, you know, we've had cases of double marginalization. I'll not take the latest case itself, where you have a vertically integrated system. The essential thing is that the one at the top of the margin must make sure that there's no way that demand gets as inelastic. And that is where it is necessary that consumers have to get a say in the matter and break up the concept of double marginalization, because any double marginalization is welfare reducing. And therefore, Vijay, your idea of trying to help people, to help those who really want to get onto the system, I don't know if I've understood you fully or correctly, I think that is something that becomes very important. So while Amir's was on the case of a regulatory role and trying to give in more in terms of importance of how you can have cooperative harmony, and Sardar talked in terms of demand rigidity, Vijay did mention the aspect that perhaps we should encourage the small players by giving them more capital. That I'm not very happy with. I think the less we just have to learn how to encourage innovation without giving them that kind of push. There must be other ways of giving push, which is what the government will have to really work out. And we can have a longer discussion on that if it is necessary. As per my watch, Akshay, do I look at question and answers in chat, or there's no time in question and answers? There's one question here. There's only one question.
Yeah.
There's a question which you say, when you say cross-border inclusivity is not possible right now, does it mean a customer in the US cannot purchase something from Flipkart in India and get it shipped to the US? I think that's for Vijay to answer that. Because as far as I can make out, that we do create our own boundaries, but the internet does not follow the national boundaries. And therefore, the boundaries that we have created is only to protect ourselves. Would you like to answer, Vijay, that question?
Yeah, I can share some views on that. So the cross-border, you're absolutely right. You know, just because somebody is in the US or in India doesn't mean that, you know, they cannot order something from either country. But if they have in some situations where, you know, both countries do not have free trade agreements, then those possibilities are limited. So in that sense, cross-border e-commerce can be difficult. And predominantly, a business to consumer format exists, so there is no problem. I think Flipkart is now owned by Walmart, if I'm not mistaken. So both between US and India, that should be okay.
In this, can I ask you a question that has bothered me a lot, having looked at the government policies and our more nationalist approach to create our own gatekeepers, you know? I mean, do we need to have our own gatekeepers? Or is it fine if you do things through Amazon? Because, you know, the concerns that come in with the question of the large capital firms, you know, the 5 firms of the US and the 5 firms of the European Union. And Valerie, maybe you can help me out in it. What is really very important is the case of the fact that if the consumer, or even if I come out, if someone, my youngster from IIT comes out with a new technology and sells it to a big company, he's not in the love of the thing for technology, he's in the love of it for business, and business means money. So how do you go about it? The second question which I'd like to ask is, why are we so reluctant and worried about consumer preferences and data? Because there's an entire new market that is going to come up called data markets. And the behavior of data markets is not like a platform economy. It's not based on network effects or two-sided platform. It's a quasi-public good. So the whole economics changes. And therefore, if some people have got my consumer preferences and think I prefer to wear only saris, well, I wear saris. It's all right. Data is what business has always gone about. And here, perhaps, Vijay, what you had suggested is to encourage people how to get onto the website may be a good thing. I don't know. I might be sounding very, very anti being a commissioner, but these are concerns that bother me. Anyone can answer me or need not answer also. The option is there. What do you think, Valerie? Or would you like to answer, Vijay?
Yeah, I just wanted to, it is purely from the angle of inclusivity. So when you have more people part of the system, more inclusivity, so more possibilities for business expansion.
True.
So that's the only, that is the.
But you can have your inclusivity, because Amazon in India claims that it has a lot of small sellers and kirana stores on it. Then the Competition Commission of India is looking at the aspect of contracts. Are they unfair or they're not fair? And they're also looking at it from, therefore, when you look at contracts, you look at privacy. So that's an area I am sure Pradeep will have a lot of questions and he will have a lot of discussion on it, because Cuts, as always, is open to new ideas. I now like to thank all of you. It was a very interesting discussion, starting with the fact that the first 2 papers were more technical, set in the oligopolistic framework, which we're all dealing with, and we have to accept everyone is big, to that ended by Vijay, who suggested ways of helping out and allowing for inclusivity. And Derek and Valerie, your comments have been very useful. And I'm sure with this recording, there are a lot of people who are going to gain from it. Now I hand it over to Pradeep for his vote of thanks.
Thank you, Geeta. So interesting to hear the conversation that you are having with the panelists in this particular session. I will refrain from commenting on the substantive issues which have been raised, but I'm sure they were quite interesting. And as you rightly said, there's a recording of this which is going on, and people can always revisit and go back. And not only that, I think this is also being relayed on YouTube, so there will be larger number of people who will be watching this than that which is coming on this particular website. Let me thank everybody to have participated in this webinar to celebrate the World Competition Day with Cuts International and the Cuts Institute for Regulation and Competition. I also thank all the paper presenters of this session and the earlier session, as well as the panelists for their valuable inputs, and the chairs, Geeta, for having very kindly agreed to chair this session at the last minute, and Dhanendra Kumar in the first session. Now, the theme for this year's Competition Day is Competition Policy for an Inclusive and Resilient Economy. It's in consonance with our flagship event, which took place a few days ago, where Geeta was also a speaker, 7th Biennial Conference, which we do every 2 years, held on 16th and 17th November. From the comments that we received from various participants in that particular webinar, they were quite happy and impressed with the quality of discussions which came out in that event. I'm sure you could have a look at it through the YouTube itself. Now, the recent decades have witnessed an erosion of competition in many countries and with important implications for inclusive growth. This decline in competition intensity can be seen in the increase of market concentration, which is happening in India as well as the ability of firms to influence prices or market power. As I said, Geeta has been a member of the Competition Commission, and I hope she agrees with what I'm saying. I'm making a statement with very clear conscience. With the world facing unparalleled economic and societal challenges, there is a need for comprehensive review of competition policy across all the countries. There is a need for a better and more extensive competition policy with the changing nature of market and digitalization. The same idea was reflected in today's presentations and panel discussions, whether it was discussions on market concentrations or the effect of e-commerce. I conclude by saying that the world is still recovering from the pandemic, and the government from the emerging and developing economies should look forward to arriving at pragmatic solutions for effective competition policy implementation, as well as recommendations for pro-competitive sectoral policies. With that, I'd like to thank you all once again, and particularly for those who are here now and who were there earlier, for their inputs, participation, and presence, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank all of you. And thank you, Pradeep. We're going to meet again, and we will be talking on the issues that I think has to be taken up. But I would like also, hopefully, that we will keep in touch. You put together some very interesting people as presenters of papers and as discussants. And yes, competition has new areas, and we have to think of a new competition policy and a new competition law, which hopefully we'll discuss later through CUTS itself.
Thank you. Well, goodbye to all.
Yes. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.